The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day so colorless it felt like the world had run out of ink. For Arthur Art Pendleton, the world had been running out of ink for 6 months, ever since Eleanor was gone. He sat in the worn armchair that still held the faint impression of her form, a ghost of pressure in the foam. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight piercing the drawn blinds, tiny, silent ballerinas performing in a theater of grief. On the mantelpiece, a photograph of Eleanor, taken last summer, was the only vibrant thing left in the room. In it, she was laughing, dirt smudged on her cheek, her hands full of wild flowers she'd proudly cultivated in the chaotic Eden of their lawn. Her eyes, even in the glossy 5x7 print, held a supernova of life. Art's world was now a black hole. The silence in the house at 12 Maple Drive was a physical presence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a lazy Sunday. It was the profound, bottomless quiet of absence. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a slow, marching drumbeat, counting the seconds since she'd last wound it. The hum of the refrigerator was a mournful drone. He'd stopped turning on the television, the radio, anything that might accidentally play a song she loved, and shatter the fragile dam holding him together. He looked through the blinds, past the dancing dust, to the world outside. The lawn. It was Eleanor's masterpiece. While the other houses on the street boasted neat, crew-cut squares of unnaturally uniform green, their lawn was a tapestry of life. It was long, yes, but it was a deep, lush emerald, interwoven with clover that buzzed with bees, dotted with the defiant yellow heads of dandelions and the shy purple of wild violets. Eleanor had called it their meadow. She despised the chemical-soaked, manicured perfection of their neighbors' yards. "A lawn should be alive, Art," she'd always said. "It should breathe and change. A perfect lawn is just a green carpet, and who wants to live with a carpet outdoors?" Now it was the only part of her that was still growing. Every uncut blade of grass was a testament to her philosophy, a living monument. The thought of starting the mower, of its roaring engine and spinning blades shearing away that life, felt like a desecration. It felt like the final act of erasure, admitting she was truly gone. So he let it grow. He let it breathe. It was an act of emotional paralysis, a quiet, desperate protest against the finality of death. The mail carrier's truck groaned to a stop, the familiar clank of the mailbox lid a sharp, metallic sound that sliced through the stillness. Art didn't move. The mail could wait. It was always the same. Bills addressed to them both. Junk mail offering impossible promises. Condolence cards that had dwindled to a trickle. But after an hour, the pressure of the unread mail, another task left undone, pushed him out of the chair. He shuffled to the door and retrieved the small stack. Bill, junk, postcard, and one crisp, cream-colored envelope. It bore the crest of the Oakwood Meadows Homeowners Association. His name was printed in a severe sans-serif font. No, Mr. Pendleton, just Arthur Pendleton. It felt like a summons. He sat back in his chair and tore it open with a thumb that trembled slightly. The paper was thick, expensive. The words were not. Official notice of violation. To the resident of 12 Maple Drive, Arthur Pendleton. This letter serves as a formal notice of violation regarding the property at the aforementioned address. An inspection conducted on this day, September 2nd, 2025, has found the property to be in non-compliance with the Oakwood Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Specifically, the property is in violation of Ordinance 7, B4, Lawn and Landscape Maintenance. Grass height on any residential lot shall not exceed 6 6 inches at any time. The current estimated grass height on your property significantly exceeds this limit. Failure to remediate this violation within 14 days will result in a fine of $100. Subsequent failures will result in increased fines and further administrative action. Sincerely, the Oakwood Meadows HOA Board. Art read it twice. Ordinance 7. B4. 6 inches. The words were cold, sterile, utterly devoid of humanity. They had measured his grief in inches and found it wanting. They had put a price tag on his paralysis. He looked from the letter to Eleanor's laughing face in the photograph. She would have raged. She would have written a blistering, witty 10-page response on the tyranny of petty rules and the ecological dead zone of the suburban lawn. He could not summon her fire. He could only feel a cold, heavy stone settling in his stomach. He slowly crumpled the thick, expensive paper in his fist. The crisp edges bit into his palm. It was a small, useless act of defiance, a crushed paper ball against a wall of regulations. He tossed it onto the coffee table, where it sat amidst the unopened bills, another monument to a life on hold. Outside, a bee buzzed lazily in the clover, blissfully unaware of its non-compliance. A week bled into the next. 2 more cream-colored envelopes arrived, identical to the first, save for the red stamped words, "Second Notice" and "Final Notice." Art left them unopened, a silent protest that punished no one but himself. The pile on the coffee table was beginning to look like a small mountain range of neglect. The weight of it all, the grief, the silence, the unopened mail, was a physical pressure on his chest. He spent his days drifting from room to room, a ghost in his own home. The doorbell rang on Friday afternoon, a sharp, 2-tone chime that felt like an assault. He wasn't expecting anyone. His few friends had learned to call first, their calls often going unanswered. He ignored it, hoping the person would leave. But the bell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. A sharp rapping followed. With a sigh that seemed to pull up the dregs of his energy, Art opened the door. On his porch stood a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a crisp beige pantsuit, her blonde hair sprayed into a motionless helmet. Her lips were a thin, disapproving line of coral lipstick. He recognized her from the annual HOA meetings he and Eleanor used to attend and mock. Carol Jenkins, the HOA president. "Arthur," she said, her voice as starched as her collar. She didn't say hello. "I'm here about the violations." "I got the letters," Art said quietly, his hand resting on the doorknob. "Evidently, you've chosen to ignore them," she replied, her eyes flicking past him to the state of his entryway, then out toward the lawn, a flicker of disgust in her gaze. "This isn't a suggestion, Arthur. It's a rule. Your situation out there is an eyesore. It's bringing down property values for the entire community." Community. She wielded the word like a cudgel. Art felt a flicker of his old self, a spark of indignation. "My wife," he began, his voice hoarse. "She loved that garden. It was—" Carol cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm very sorry for your loss. We all are. But the grieving period has its limits. The bylaws are clear. We can't make exceptions. If we make one for you, we have to make one for everyone. It's about maintaining community standards." Her complete lack of empathy was breathtaking. She spoke of his grief as if it were an overdue library book. He could see his next-door neighbor, Gary, peering through his own blinds, his face a mask of nosy satisfaction. Gary, whose lawn was a weedless, chemical-green expanse he tended to with the obsessive focus of a bomb disposal expert. "The grass is bringing down property values?" Art asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's just grass." "It's a reflection of the neighborhood," Carol snapped, her patience clearly gone. And your reflection is unacceptable. You have 48 hours to comply. After that, we will be hiring our own landscaping service to remediate the violation, and you will be billed for the service. A lien will be placed on your property until it's paid. Do you understand?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned on her heel and marched down the walkway, her sensible pumps clicking on the concrete, a general leaving a battlefield she had already won. Art stood in the doorway, the cool air raising goosebumps on his arms. He felt small, powerless, and utterly, completely alone. The confrontation sent a tremor through his already frayed nervous system. That night he felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a fluttering pulse that he couldn't seem to calm. The next morning he made an appointment with his doctor. Dr. Evans was a kind, no-nonsense man who had been his physician for 20 years. He listened patiently as Art described the palpitations, the anxiety. He took his blood pressure, his brow furrowed. 150 over 95, Art, he said, sliding the stethoscope from his ears. It's high. The stress isn't helping. Grief is a powerful stressor. It can have profound physical effects if you don't manage it. Art just nodded, staring at a poster of the human circulatory system on the wall. "You've been through a tremendous trauma," Dr. Evans continued, his tone softening. "But you can't let it sit and fester. Eleanor wouldn't want that. You're a creative person, always have been. You spent your whole life designing things, solving visual problems. Grief needs an outlet, Arthur. It needs a project. You have to channel that energy, that sorrow, into something. Anything. Build a ship in a bottle. Learn to paint something. Just don't sit in that quiet house and let it swallow you whole." He left the clinic with a prescription for a mild beta blocker, and the doctor's words echoing in his head. A project. Channel that energy. When he got home, there was another envelope taped to his front door. It wasn't cream-colored, it was a garish yellow, a certified letter he'd apparently missed. He tore it open. It was from the HOA's legal counsel. The language was even more threatening, a deluge of legalese about liens, foreclosure, and collection agencies. It stated that a landscaping crew was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. This was it. The final ultimatum. That night, sleep was impossible. He wandered into his old home studio, a room he hadn't entered in months. It was covered in a thin film of dust. Rolls of drafting paper stood in a corner. Portfolios of his old work, logos, ad campaigns, illustrations, were stacked on a shelf. He pulled one down and opened it. The clean lines, the clever use of negative space, the vibrant colors. It felt like a lifetime ago, a man he no longer knew. His eyes drifted to the window, which overlooked the backyard and the sprawling meadow. The moon was full, casting the long grass in a silver, ethereal glow. It looked beautiful, magical. An untamed sea of silver and shadow. The lawyer's letter lay on his drafting table. Carol's smug, triumphant face swam in his memory. Dr. Evans's voice echoed in his ear. A project. Channel that energy. Solve a visual problem. He looked at the threatening letter. He looked at the wild, beautiful lawn. He looked at his dusty drafting tools. And then an idea began to form. It started as a tiny spark in the vast darkness of his mind, a flicker of the old Art Pendleton. An idea so absurd, so defiant, so utterly and beautifully petty that it made him feel something he hadn't felt in 6 months. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something sharper, more dangerous. It was inspiration. He pulled a fresh sheet of drafting paper from the roll, picked up a charcoal pencil, and for the first time in a very long time, he began to draw. The house, for the first time in half a year, was filled with a different kind of energy. The oppressive silence was broken by the scratch of charcoal on paper, the slide of a T-square, the soft snap of a compass being adjusted. Art worked through the night, fueled by a potent cocktail of grief, rage, and a rediscovered creative fervor. The project took hold of him, pulling him from the gray fog and into a world of lines, curves, and possibilities. This wouldn't be a simple maze with dead ends designed to confuse. That felt too angry, too negative. He was designing a labyrinth, a single, unicursal path that wound its way methodically, meditatively, toward a center and back out again. It was a symbol of journey, of pilgrimage. A journey through sorrow to a place of peace. It was perfect. His old skills, dormant but not forgotten, came back to him with a comforting familiarity. His hands, which had felt so clumsy and useless for months, moved with precision and purpose. He didn't just draw a pattern, he imbued it with memory. He designed the main path to follow the gentle, sweeping curve of Eleanor's signature from their wedding certificate. He incorporated the logarithmic spiral of a nautilus shell, a shape she had loved and collected. The center of the labyrinth wasn't just a destination. He designed it as a stylized sunburst, mirroring the one she had painstakingly painted on their kitchen ceiling, a permanent patch of sunshine for rainy days. Every line he drew was an act of defiance, but it was also an act of love. He was encoding his tribute to her into the very land she had cherished. As dawn broke, casting pale pink and orange stripes across the sky, his blueprint was complete. A magnificent, intricate design that would cover the entire front lawn. He had even done the calculations. The walls of the labyrinth would be the uncut grass, which he would trim to a precise 5.9 inches. The path would be mowed low, down to 2 inches. He would follow the letter of their law, Ordinance 7B4, with the obsessive precision of a mathematician while simultaneously shattering its intent into 1,000,000 pieces. He didn't sleep. He drank a cup of coffee, the taste sharp and real, and went to the garage. The lawnmower was buried under a stack of old newspapers and a dusty tarp. It was Eleanor's mower, a sturdy, self-propelled Honda she'd been immensely proud of. He checked the oil, filled the tank with fresh gasoline. The first pull of the starter cord was stiff. The second sputtered. On the third, the engine roared to life, a sudden, violent noise that made the garage walls tremble. It was the sound of action. He wheeled it out onto the lawn. The morning dew soaked the cuffs of his jeans. He took a deep breath of the cool, damp air, fragrant with the smell of clover and wet earth. Using a series of stakes and a long string, he began to mark out the main lines of his design, translating the drawing from paper to grass. It was slow, meticulous work. By mid-morning, he was ready to make the first cut. He positioned the mower at the entrance to the path he had marked, took a deep breath, and engaged the blades. The roar intensified, and a spray of green clippings flew from the side. He pushed forward, carving a clean 2-inch-high swath through the 6-inch deep meadow. The contrast was immediate and striking, a dark green velvety line appearing in a field of lighter, wilder green. He worked for hours, lost in the rhythm of the task. The push of the mower, the turn at a corner, the smell of freshly cut grass, a smell he once associated with a chore, now the perfume of his rebellion. Neighbors began to notice. Mr. Henderson from across the street paused his power walking to stare, bewildered. Mrs. Gable, 2 doors down, lowered her newspaper. Around noon, a voice cut through the engine's drone. "Whoa, Mr. P! What on earth are you doing?" He shut off the mower and turned, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a grassy hand. It was Chloe, the college student who lived next door. She was standing on the edge of his property, phone in hand, her expression a mixture of awe and amusement. Complying with the HOA, Art said, a wry smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Chloe's eyes widened as she took in the grand scale of the emerging pattern. "No way," she breathed. "This is because of that letter, isn't it? My mom said the HOA lady, Carol, was going around complaining." She raised her phone. "Do you mind if This is epic." "Go ahead," Art said, feeling a strange lightness. He started the mower again and continued his work, Chloe documenting the process. The sun climbed high in the sky, beating down on his back. He was exhausted. His muscles ached. His hands were blistered, but he didn't stop. He was driven by a force he hadn't felt in ages. He was creating something again. He was fighting back. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, he cut the final curve of the path, leading to the sunburst center. He shut off the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. He stood in the middle of his creation, breathing heavily, covered from head to toe in a fine mulch of grass clippings. It was done. From the street, it was breathtaking. It was no longer a neglected lawn. It was a sprawling piece of land art. The labyrinth's path, a soft, inviting ribbon of dark green, snaked its way through the lighter, taller grass walls. It was a declaration, written in chlorophyll on a half-acre canvas. It was beautiful, it was absurd, and it was, by every miserable, petty letter of the law, in perfect compliance. Art looked at his work, then up at the sky, a silent message to Eleanor. "See, I'm still fighting." The following morning, Sunday, the retribution was swift. Carol Jenkins's perfectly timed morning stroll with her miniature poodle, Prince Fluffy III, came to an abrupt halt at the edge of Art's property. Her jaw, set in its usual line of grim determination, went slack. Her face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a deep, blossoming fury that turned her complexion a shade of puce that clashed horribly with her salmon-pink jogging suit. For a full minute, she stood frozen, her hand tightening on the leash until the poodle let out a small yelp. Her first call, naturally, was to the police. 45 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Two officers, one a veteran with a weary mustache and the other a rookie who looked barely out of his teens, got out of the car. Carol was waiting for them, practically vibrating with indignation. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said, pointing a trembling finger at the lawn. This is what I'm reporting. It's a public nuisance. It's an affront. He's thumbing his nose at the entire neighborhood." Art watched from his window as the two officers walked the perimeter of his lawn. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, had a look of profound, world-weary amusement. The younger one, Davis, was trying and failing to suppress a smile. They walked a short section of the path, Miller bending down to inspect the grass height. They conferred for a moment, then walked back to Carol. "Ma'am," Officer Miller began, his voice a gravelly monotone that suggested he had seen far stranger things in his 20 years on the force. "What exactly is the crime you're reporting?" "The crime? Look at it! It's a graffiti lawn! He's violated the HOA rules!" Carol sputtered. "With all due respect, ma'am, we don't enforce HOA rules. That's a civil matter," Miller said patiently. "As far as a public nuisance goes, I don't see one. The sidewalk isn't blocked, it isn't making any noise, and it's not a hazard. To be frank, it just looks like the man mowed his lawn in a very creative pattern." "But the rules! The grass height!" she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "We're not the grass police, ma'am," the younger officer Davis chimed in, earning a slight glare from his partner. "And from what I can see, most of it is cut quite short." "There's no law against mowing your lawn in a pattern," Miller concluded, his tone final. "Have a good day, ma'am." They got back in their car and drove away, leaving Carol standing on the sidewalk, utterly defeated and fuming. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. Meanwhile, a different kind of storm was brewing. Chloe's video, which she had edited into a dramatic time-lapse set to a classical piece of music, had been posted late last night. She had titled it, "My 62-year-old neighbor got a nasty letter from his HOA about his grass. They have no idea who they're messing with." She'd tagged it with #HOA, #LawnCare, #malicious compliance, and #art. By Sunday morning, it had exploded. The story was irresistible. A grieving widower, a tyrannical HOA, a brilliant artistic act of rebellion. The video was shared by local bloggers, then picked up by a popular aggregator site. By noon, #Labyrinth Lawn was trending on Twitter. Comments poured in from all over the country. "This is the most beautifully petty thing I have ever seen. A true artist. I would pay to walk that labyrinth. Give that man a medal and fire his HOA president." Art, who barely knew how to check his email, was bewildered when Chloe showed him the exploding numbers on her phone. People were calling him a legend, a hero. Strangers were defending him, celebrating him. A local news station had left a comment asking for an interview. For the first time, he didn't feel so alone. Carol Jenkins, however, was not a woman to be deterred by a minor setback like the law. Thwarted by the police, she escalated. Her next call was to the City of Oakwood's Code Enforcement Department. On Monday morning, a white city-owned sedan pulled up. A man in a collared shirt with a city logo embroidered on it got out, a clipboard in one hand and a serious expression on his face. This was Mr. Davies. He was not amused. He was a bureaucrat, a man who saw the world in permits and ordinances. He introduced himself to Art at the door and explained he was there to investigate a complaint regarding improper land use and potential code violations. He proceeded to conduct a thorough, humorless inspection. He pulled out a specialized tape measure and meticulously measured the grass height in a dozen different spots. "The paths are 2 inches, Davies grunted, making a note. "The walls, 5.8, 5.9, 5.95. You're in compliance with the city's 6-inch ordinance." Art felt a surge of triumph, but Carol had clearly been in Mr. Davies's ear. He wasn't done. He walked the property, his eyes scanning for any possible infraction. He looked at the labyrinth not as art, but as a problem to be solved. "This pattern," he said, gesturing vaguely, "it could be considered an unconventional landscape modification. And you held no permit for it." "A permit?" Art asked, incredulous. "A permit for mowing my lawn?" "When it constitutes a major alteration to the property's aesthetic, yes," Davies said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced himself. He seemed to be searching for a rule, any rule that would stick. And it could attract crowds, which is a public safety concern. He scribbled on his clipboard for a long moment, then tore off a sheet. It was a formal citation. "I'm citing you for violating City Code 114.7, improper use of residential property," he said, handing the slip to Art. "It's a catch-all for situations like this. You have the right to appeal. In the meantime, you are ordered to return the lawn to a conventional state." The injustice of it was a physical blow. He had followed their rules, their ridiculous petty inches, and they had simply invented a new one to punish him. The system wasn't just blind, it was actively hostile to anything outside its narrow definitions. As Davies drove away, Art looked at the citation, then at his beautiful, defiant labyrinth. They hadn't just cited his lawn, they had cited his grief, his creativity, his tribute to his wife. And he decided, right then and there, that he was done being quiet. The flimsy paper of the citation felt heavier than a tombstone in Art's hand. It was the embodiment of the bureaucratic machine he was up against, faceless, illogical, and relentless. His first instinct was to retreat, to surrender, to mow the whole thing down and give them the sterile, soulless green carpet they so desperately craved. The fight felt too big, and he was just one man. He sank into his armchair, the gray stillness of the house threatening to reclaim him. A knock on the door pulled him from his spiral. It was Chloe, her phone held out like a shield. "Mr. P, you are not going to believe this," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The video just got picked up by a national news site. People are going crazy. Look at these comments." She scrolled through the endless stream. "Can we get a drone shot of this masterpiece? Someone start a GoFundMe for his legal fees. This guy is my spirit animal." Then she stopped on one particular comment. It was from a user named Wort, Lawn Ranger 78. "This is amazing. He shouldn't just leave it. He should hold a festival, a Labyrinth Palooza. I'd drive 3 states to see it." Chloe looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with a brilliant, chaotic idea. "Mr. P," she said slowly, "that's it." Art looked at her, confused. "That's what?" "You don't fight them in their world of codes and citations. You fight them in our world. You lean into it. We don't just have a labyrinth. We have a venue. We have an event." The idea was utterly insane. It was pouring gasoline on a fire, and it was the most wonderful thing Art had ever heard. The weariness in his bones was replaced by a jolt of adrenaline. The citation wasn't an order. It was a challenge. "A tournament," Art said, the word tasting strange and wonderful on his tongue. "A labyrinth tournament." "Yes," Chloe exclaimed, already pacing his living room. "Simple, fun, a race. Timed runs to the center and back. We can have divisions, kids under 12, teens, adults. We'll make it a whole community thing." For the next 2 hours, they planned. The collaboration was a balm to Art's soul. He was working with someone again, bouncing ideas, feeling the creative energy that had once defined his life. He fired up his old desktop computer and dusted off his design software. Chloe, a marketing major, directed him with a millennial's innate grasp of branding and social media. Together, they designed a flyer. Art created a simple, elegant logo, a stylized labyrinth with a sunburst at its center. He chose a friendly, bold font. Chloe wrote the copy, her language full of buzzwords and infectious enthusiasm, announcing the first, and possibly last, annual Pendleton Labyrinth Tournament. They said his grass was too long. He said, "Challenge accepted. Come one, come all to 12 Maple Drive this Saturday. Witness the legendary Labyrinth lawn in person. Test your speed and agility in a timed race to the heart of the labyrinth and back. Fun, prizes, and a wholesome display of community spirit in the face of petty tyranny. Kids race, under 12, 1 p.m. Adults race, 12 plus, 2 p.m. Free entry. Bragging rights are priceless." Chloe posted the flyer online. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Within an hour, it had thousands of shares. The local news station that had tried to contact him before immediately called back, confirming they would be there with a camera crew. A man who owned a popular local food truck, the Grilled Cheese Incident, messaged Chloe offering to park on the street and donate 10% of his profits to a charity of Art's choice. A local print shop offered to run off 500 copies of the flyer for free. People weren't just supporting him online anymore. They were mobilizing. It was no longer his fight alone. It had become the people's fight. It was a battle for creativity, for individuality, for the simple human right to mow one's lawn in a funny pattern. As Art watched the RSVPs and positive comments pour in, he felt a profound shift. The labyrinth was no longer just a memorial to his wife or an act of defiance. It had grown into something more, something he couldn't have imagined. It had become a beacon, and on Saturday everyone was coming to see it shine. Saturday arrived with the kind of brilliant, cloudless blue sky that feels like a benediction. By 12:30 p.m., Maple Drive was transformed. The quiet, suburban street was buzzing with an energy it hadn't seen since the annual 4th of July block parties of years past. Cars were parked for blocks in every direction. The sizzle and savory smell of melting cheese drifted from the Grilled Cheese Incident food truck, which had a line 20 people deep. Families had spread blankets on the sidewalk and the grassy verge across the street. Art's lawn was the center of this new universe. It was ringed with spectators, their phones held aloft, snapping pictures of the now famous Labyrinth. Chloe, armed with a clipboard and a megaphone, was organizing the kids for the first race, her voice full of cheerful authority. Art had set up a small folding table with a pitcher of lemonade and a sign-up sheet. Dozens of names, scrawled in the loopy handwriting of children and the steadier script of adults, filled the page. He stood on his porch, looking out at the scene, and felt a feeling so foreign he could barely identify it. Joy. Pure, simple joy. Kids were giggling, chasing each other around the entrance to the path. Neighbors who had only ever offered a polite wave were now chatting and laughing with strangers. He had created this pocket of defiant happiness. At exactly 1 p.m., Chloe's voice echoed through the megaphone. "All right, racers, on your mark. Get set, go!" A gaggle of 10 kids, ranging in age from 5 to 12, shot into the Labyrinth's entrance. The crowd cheered as the small figures disappeared and reappeared between the 5.9-inch high walls of grass. It was chaotic, hilarious, and utterly wonderful. A little girl in a pink tutu took a wrong turn, an impossibility in a unicursal labyrinth, but she managed it, and had to be pointed in the right direction by the laughing crowd. A boy of about 10, with a serious, competitive expression, reached the sunburst center first, slapped the small orange cone Art had placed there, and sprinted back out, his arms raised in triumph. The adult race was even more popular. Teenagers, parents, even a few seniors, took their turn running the winding path. The event was a resounding success, a perfect picture of community spirit. And then, just as the final racer was crossing the finish line, 2 vehicles pulled up, parking illegally in front of a fire hydrant. One was Carol Jenkins's pristine white Lexus. The other was the white sedan belonging to Mr. Davies from Code Enforcement. They emerged from their cars like harbingers of doom. Carol's face was a thundercloud of righteous fury. Mr. Davies looked profoundly unhappy to be there. They marched on to the edge of the lawn, their presence immediately sucking the joyous energy from the air. "This has to stop! All of you disperse immediately!" Carol shouted, her voice shrill but failing to carry over the happy din. Mr. Davies spoke into a small bullhorn he was carrying, his amplified voice jarring and official. "This is an unsanctioned public gathering. You are in violation of city ordinances. This event is being shut down." The crowd quieted, turning to face the new arrivals. A few boos and hisses rippled through the onlookers. The news camera, which had been interviewing the winner of the kids' race, swung around to capture the confrontation. This was the moment. Art walked down from his porch and met them at the entrance to his labyrinth. He felt strangely calm. He was no longer the frightened, grieving man who had crumpled their first letter. "Carol, Mr. Davies," he said, his voice even, "you're trespassing." "I am shutting down this illegal circus," Carol spat, gesturing at the families and children. "And you, Arthur, are going to get a fine so large you'll be mowing this monstrosity back to normal before sunset." "On what grounds exactly?" Art asked, genuinely curious. "Permit violations, public safety, unlawful assembly. Mr. Davies listed off, reading from his clipboard, though his heart didn't seem in it. Instead of arguing codes and ordinances, Art turned to the news reporter, who was now standing beside him with a microphone. He gestured for it, and the reporter handed it over. Art took a deep breath, the faces of his new community watching him, waiting. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice steady and clear, broadcast through the news camera's audio. "My name is Art Pendleton, and this is my lawn." A few cheers went up. 6 months ago, I lost my wife, Eleanor. She loved this lawn. She loved everything that grew in it. For her, it was a symbol of life, of beauty in imperfection. When she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to cut it, because it felt like cutting away the last living piece of her. And for that, the HOA, and later the city, called my property an eyesore. A violation. They saw overgrown grass and messy wildflowers, and they decided it had to be punished. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. So I complied. I cut the grass, but I decided I wouldn't just erase what she loved. I would try to build something new from it. This labyrinth, this isn't just an act of defiance. It's an act of remembering. It's an act of trying to find a path through sorrow. They wanted rules, regulations, and sterile uniformity. I wanted to build something that could bring people together, something that could create a little bit of joy. "You tell me," he said, his voice rising with passion, "which one is more valuable to a community?" The silence that followed was broken by a single person clapping. Then another and another, until the entire street erupted in a thunderous wave of applause and cheers. It was a complete and total validation. The crowd wasn't just on his side. They were part of his story. The news camera was pointed directly at Mr. Davies and Carol Jenkins. Mr. Davies looked at the cheering crowd, at the camera, and then at his clipboard. He visibly deflated, a man recognizing a public relations tsunami when he saw one. He muttered something to Carol, shook his head, and began a pragmatic retreat to his sedan. Carol stood alone for a moment longer. Her face was a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. She was surrounded by the very community she claimed to be protecting, and they were cheering for the man she was trying to crush. She had been defeated, not by a lawyer or a loophole, but by the undeniable, joyful spirit of the people she governed. Without another word, she turned, marched back to her Lexus, and sped away. The crowd roared even louder. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Labyrinth of Defiance became a small-town legend. The news segment went viral, painting Carol Jenkins and the Oakwood Meadows HOA in a spectacularly unflattering light. The fallout was immediate. An emergency HOA board meeting was called. Faced with a petition signed by over 3/4 of the neighborhood residents, many of whom had been at the tournament, Carol Jenkins was forced to tender her resignation as president. The improper use of residential property citation from the city was quietly and unceremoniously dropped. Art's life, once defined by silence and shades of gray, was now filled with color and conversation. The labyrinth remained for the rest of the autumn, a local landmark. On any given afternoon, you could find kids walking its winding path, their parents chatting on the sidewalk. Art left a small guest book on his porch, and it quickly filled with messages of thanks and support from people all over the city. He no longer spent his days adrift inside the house. He spent them outside, on his porch, talking to the new friends he had made. He discovered that Mr. Henderson from across the street was a retired history teacher with a passion for ancient civilizations, and was fascinated by the labyrinth's Cretan origins. He learned that Mrs. Gable was a master baker who started dropping off fresh-baked bread every Tuesday. One afternoon, Chloe sat with him on the porch steps, a laptop balanced on her knees. "Okay, Mr. P," she said, pointing to the screen. "This is the basics of vector illustration. It's way easier than those old drafting tools you use." Art peered at the screen, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "All right," he said. "Show me." He was learning again, engaging, connecting. He was mentoring and being mentored, a part of the world once more. On the edge of his property, near the sidewalk, he had tilled a small patch of earth. With the help of some neighbors, he had started a small community garden, planting winter vegetables. It was a new project, a new patch of life to tend. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, Art sat on his porch swing, a cup of tea warming his hands. A young family was walking the labyrinth, the parents holding their small child's hands, their laughter carrying on the cool evening air. He looked at the intricate green pattern that had changed his life. It was no longer a symbol of his fight against Carol or the HOA. It was a testament to the fact that even from the deepest grief, something new and beautiful could grow. He hadn't preserved Eleanor's memory in amber, trapped in a single moment of an uncut lawn. He had allowed it to transform, to grow into something living and joyful that he could share with everyone. He thought of her laughing face in the photograph on the mantelpiece. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she would have absolutely loved it. Arthur Pendleton, the Labyrinth man of Maple Drive, took a sip of his tea and smiled, a real, full-bodied smile that reached his eyes and promised a new beginning.